Our next session is entitled Creative Aging, Engaging Older Adults as Learners and Makers with Annie Montgomery, Director of Education, and Maura O'Malley, CEO and co-founder of the one and only Lifetime Arts. Lifetime Arts is truly the national leader in creative aging program development. Lifetime Arts connects the people, funding, ideas, and strategies necessary to increase the number and quality of arts education programs for older adults. Through a variety of services and initiatives, they provide practical support and resources to individuals, organizations, and others that serve older adults or should serve them. And they provide technical assistance, professional development, training, and information services to support the design, funding, and implementation of creative aging programs nationwide. I am very proud to remind us here gathered today, our audience, that NASA named Lifetime Arts as the recommended capacity building partner for our Leveraging State Investments in Creative Aging national grant program for state arts agencies, which we're conducting in partnership with Aroha Philanthropies. Once again, we're going to have an audience Q&A towards the end of the session, and I will invite you to directly type in your questions in the chat during and throughout Maura and Annie's presentation. I'll collect them along the way, and we'll share them towards the end. And to remind you, if you want a copy of the chat, you yourself can go to the chat box that you have, click the three dots, or you'll see Save Chat, and that will automatically save to your local machine as a text file. I also want to give a quick shout out to my colleague, Carol Kelly, who is helping us produce this event. Carol's been backstage sharing slides and links. So Carol, thank you so much for your great help. We're going to kick it off with the video. So I am going to go ahead and share that screen.
I never painted before. I never sang. I mean, I did some singing in the shower, but never in public, you know, stuff like that. No, and not only that, you get to meet new people, interesting people. And today, we had the congressman from this district. He came, he said hello, and he sang with us.
Most people that I worked with in this session would never have had the opportunity to do artwork like this before, or learn how to come out of their shell, so to speak, and discover what they can do if they have some instruction and the materials to do it.
You saw it today, like this energy, it's like whoosh. They were so excited. Like they were getting it. It was starting to click for them. After 4 weeks, the tools were starting to make sense. They were starting to use them their way.
It's just a really, really stimulating environment. And the other thing that's always impressed me about this place, and particularly the people that I've met through art, is how kind some people can be to each other and what a support that is on a day-to-day basis.
People can really, in expressing themselves, draw themselves out of their inner aloneness and make them feel part of the environment in some way, part of life.
You're looking at a happy man right now. And it was all on account of all of the singing. I'm in a good mood. I'm not depressed. I'm looking forward to life in general because of this experience.
Okay. Hello, everyone. I'm Maura O'Malley, and glad to see you all again. I just want to give you a little bit of background about Lifetime Arts. We were established in 2008 as a service organization to help develop an infrastructure for what was then the emerging field of creative aging. As arts professionals and as caregivers, my co-founder Ed Friedman and I saw a need to shift traditional programming from passive entertainment to engaged learning by promoting arts education specifically for older adults. Lifetime Arts, as Susan said, works across the country with public libraries, arts and cultural organizations, teaching artists, and senior service organizations, and the systems, institutions, and funders that support them. We provide training and professional development, like today's workshop, as well as other online resources, technical assistance, and consulting services. And we train teaching artists to work with older adults and with senior service organizations. Our goal is to help community-based organizations deliver engaging, participatory programs that recognize older adults as creative and social learners. Today, we're going to start with a little bit of an overview of creative aging, introduce you to some of the key ideas, including the research, funding trends, and types of practitioners, and the creative aging arts and education model that is taking shape across the country, and how it has been adapted to remote programs due to the pandemic. Annie?
Great. Thanks, Maura. Hi, I'm Annie Montgomery. I'm the Director of Education with Lifetime Arts, and I'm just so grateful to be here with all of you today, learning together in this just fantastic platform to think about creative aging and what that may look like and mean in the communities that we all hope to serve and be a part of. So today in this session, we're gonna we're gonna begin the way I love that Elizabeth Merritt mentioned this and Heather Eichmeyer, and following up on Ashton's presentation yesterday, we're gonna assess our own feelings and attitude about aging. We're gonna do a little mind fielding there and uncover and look into that book a little bit, because if we look at our own aging, it informs, and how we feel about aging, it informs how we might work with older adults in practice. So we're gonna look at that a little bit. We will also review the history and research behind creative aging program design, including supporting research, the benefits of the participation, what does mastery and social engagement mean. We're going to clarify a little bit the creative aging arts education model specifically, and what we mean when we talk about creative aging arts education, and then look at cross-sector funding and collaborations. We're going to review best practices in creative aging program design. And finally, we're going to review and introduce maybe some tips and adaptations for remote delivery for creative aging programs that organizations across this country are successfully delivering and adapting to. But first, just to peel back the onion a little bit, why is everybody talking about aging? Why is there a conference and an initiative, and why are we here today? Well, there's some really obvious reasons for that, but it's not to be we can't underscore it enough, because the population is aging. All of us are, and this is due to falling fertility rates. People are having fewer children, and rising longevity. So simply put, people generally are living longer and healthier lives, although we definitely want to acknowledge that COVID-19, in fact, is projected to reduce life expectancy for older adults by about 1 year, according to the official Journal of National Academy of Sciences. Overall, though, according to the US Census Bureau, starting in 2030, and this is some of the statistics that Elizabeth mentioned earlier, I want to underscore, older Americans will make up 21% of the population, up from 15% today. And by 2034, the number of adults age 65 and older will outnumber those under the age of 18. So this demographic shift is not a temporary situation, but it is a permanent shift towards an older population. So what does that mean for our older adults now? But what does that mean for all of us? So now what I am gonna ask everybody to do is be in the same space with me. So be brave if you don't mind, and turn on your cameras. Join me here so I can see your lovely faces, because as much as we can with 150 people. Oh, hello, Barry, I saw you wave. Nice to see you again. We're gonna have a little bit of a conversation and just dig in a little bit. And again, I just want to circle back a little bit to some of the topics that Elizabeth and Heather mentioned, but ageism can sometimes be the crux of all of our preconceived ideas about what it means to grow older. And we're all victim and we're all ageist, unfortunately. And so how do we undo those narratives? Or at least think about it with a little more intentionality. So what I would love for you all to do and share with me now, and you can do this a couple of ways. I would like you to think about what your internal age is, not your actual age, not how, what it says on your birth certificate or your license, but how do you feel internally, inside, and specifically, how do you feel internally today? And if you feel like sharing, well, actually, I'm going to ask everybody to share. Let's just get vulnerable and get in it a little bit. And I'll call on your name. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to offer two suggestions. You can either, I'm going to put up my age and put it kind of next to my face, next to my camera here. So you can see that internally, I feel 65. So can you write down what your internal age is and hold it up into the camera? And if you don't want to hold it up into the camera, you can put it into chat. But I would love to see faces and ages. And I'm going to give you a minute to scroll through our pages and see. So keep it up, hold it up if you don't mind. And let's see how folks are feeling today. And if you don't mind, I'll prepare you in a second. I may call on one or two of you to share your feelings about this. So hold up your numbers. How are you feeling internally today? Put it up really close to the camera so I can see. Great. And if I see a number held up, I'm going to take that as a cue that you're okay with me calling on you. So take it down now if you don't want to be called on. Great. All right. Laura Smith. I see you there, and I know you. I recognize you. Can you tell me the age that you held up and what that age means to you?
Age, hi, Annie. It's great to see you.
Nice to see you.
The age I'm holding up is 54, and that is the age I actually am. And that's how I feel today.
Great. So what does 54 mean to you?
54 means that I am old enough to really start to be feeling in my bones what Mary Oliver says about, this is my one wild and precious life. I'm old enough to see the end of it. And young enough to really, I appreciate all that I have in terms of my abilities and my experiences, and I don't want to be younger.
Great. So thank you for sharing. You're in your skin.
I'm in my skin.
In your soul. Yeah, I hear you. I hear
today.
you. Yeah. Today. We know that sometimes that varies from day to day, correct? Yeah. Barry, I see your number. Can you tell me what your number is and share with us why you chose that number today?
Yeah, hi, Annie. Thanks. When I did this course in March, I held up a much younger number than I held up today, 56. And just like our colleague just held up her number, it's my age. It's my current age. And I feel like I'm running out of time. Today, I feel like I'm running out of time to do all the things that I want to do. So I'm still pretty energetic about things, but I really feel like I gotta cut the crap and get on with it.
Great. I relate to that feeling. I think we all do, right? You only have this one life, this one shot at it. And what are we going to make of our time here? And what is that going to look like for us, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you. And there's no right or wrong answer to this internal age. This is really, it's going to vary for all of us, and your health that day might affect how you feel, whether you got sleep the night before, whether you're in love, whether you learned something new. It is a mental mind space age, right? And it varies from day to day to day. So let's do another little activity here. I'd love everyone to put into the chat any ageist thing that you have ever heard, or what you might perceive as ageist, or maybe we should perceive it as ageist. For me, one of them that I often do and say, and trying not to often do and say, is, oh God, senior moment, right? Oh, I'm having a senior moment. I forgot where my keys are, you know? So why do we do that? And what does that mean? And why? Because my teenager forgets his keys every day. Why isn't he having a senior moment, right? So what I'd love for you to do, put in the chat some ageist things you've seen or heard. And oh, great. I see Deborah said, oh, I lost it. I'm going to go back up. She said, a boomer remover. Oh my goodness, that's a new one. Millennials are ruining insert the industry. Thank you. Deborah Soule said, you don't look your age. Kelly says, my 88-year-old mother complaining about how old people drive, right? Bonnie says, I'm too old for this, blah, blah, blah. Thank you. Linda Hillier says, I feel like I'm getting old when my body aches. Yes. Oh, and Bonnie says, interesting, you say the elderly. I hate this phrase. It lumps every older person into one bucket. And there's lots, you're not alone. And there's lots of feelings about what we, one, call older adults, or what we want to be called as older adults. So, and everybody's different about that. You're too young to understand, or you're too old to understand. I've heard both of those. Thank you, Liz. Okay, boomer. Oh my goodness. I get that one a lot from my 14-year-old son. I'm too old to wear anything that shows legs or cleavage. Yes, Laura, I've been there with you too. I can't wear this anymore. Great, keep those coming in. All of those things, these cliches really they're part of our vernacular. They are part of our everyday life. We don't even know we're saying them until we point them out. The way we feel internally does not always match the way we look to the outside world, or the way someone perceives us to be. And how does that shift day to day in terms of our identity in the world? So I want you to think about that as we keep moving through some of the best practices around creative aging. And Maura is going to ask you specifically what you think about ageism. Maura, go ahead.
So exactly that. What is it that you think personally about ageism? If you'd like to share that with us, just put it in the chat and I'm going to read a few of those out. What your personal feeling is about ageism. Give you a minute or two.
What ageism means to you.
And Karen says, like any ism, it oversimplifies to the point of direct and indirect harm. Right. Mary says, not being given career opportunities because you're too old or too young. So it's work related as well. And it limits people. Bonnie says, the NASA team says, it limits people of every age. So it's young and old and everyone in between. And Bonnie says, where does humor start and ageism begin? That's a great question, because it's really easy to be funny about, or to think you're being funny about this stuff. Boy, everyone's got a lot to say here. Some people were or are always old, no matter the age. Some people always young, no matter the age. Vicky thinks that. And Chiquita says that what her thinking about ageism is being unfairly judged. We have all these. It'd be great if we can capture these, Susan, in the chat. Do these get saved? Because I could go on for quite a while here.
Yes.
One more. Deborah says, pointing it out limits the possibilities, whether real or not. All very potent thoughts. Nobody's shy about saying this. Obviously, this is something that is connecting to everybody, this issue. Okay, Annie.
Yeah, you can go to the next slide.
Okay.
Carol. Go ahead.
Great. So as we're beginning to realize, a major barrier to successful aging is ageism, which is embedded in our society, and it's often self-inflicted. Some of you may have heard Ashton yesterday, and she says we're all aging. So ageism is actually a prejudice against our future selves. There's nobody out of this club. If you're alive, you're aging. And as creative aging advocates, we acknowledge that growing older is a natural and positive aspect of living. And all of us are deserving of access to learning and to community. At Lifetime Arts, we use the term older adults to denote people who are 55 and better. These are the folks that these programs are generally designed for. We find that this term, older adults, as opposed to seniors or elderly, is a broader, more inclusive term for all the kinds of people, the different kinds of people that we engage in this work. It's often preferable to the students themselves. So as we discussed in our opening activity, negative messaging about aging bombards us constantly. However, there's new scholarship, relatively new scholarship and views on aging that have emerged, challenging the perception of aging as a period of inevitable decline and loss. So those positive aging proponents celebrate growing older as a time ripe with potential personal growth and enhanced well-being. It's shifting society's view of aging away from a deficits approach towards an assets-based approach. And creative aging work is increasingly recognized as an important contributor to these positive aging efforts. Creative aging programming effectively rewrites old narratives about aging and embeds new ideas about what it means to grow older. And these demographic and societal shifts are affecting every aspect of our lives, including work and service, family structures, healthcare, community planning, labor policies, financial services, higher education, and most importantly, for each individual and for every community, the quality of life. Because older adults, next slide, please.
Carol, you can go to the next slide, please. Thank you.
Okay. We were talking about this earlier with Heather and Elizabeth on the cross-sector aspect of this work. And because older adults are included in and served by agencies and institutions across all sectors of our society, creative aging generates interest, funding, and research across sectors. So conversations around serving older adults are happening at the local, state, and federal level. Health organizations, affinity groups, private foundations, city governments, arts and education organizations, positive aging groups are all exploring ways to collaborate. Understanding this, we pursue and encourage cross-sector partnerships, underscoring the idea that older adults are a common constituency, creating opportunities for collaboration to share resources, funding, and to improve service delivery. Over the past few years, we've supported cross-sector collaborations at the state level in New York and Wyoming. In New York, the State Arts Council and the New York State Office of the Aging are jointly funding an innovative initiative and implementing 16 online creative aging programs hosted by the local area agencies on aging. Those are the regional entities that take care of older adults, and they're generally county-based all across the country. In Wyoming, the State Arts Council and the State Library are launching over 40 programs statewide, with the library serving as host for in-person and remote creative aging programs. This partnership is supported by a significant grant to Lifetime Arts from a private foundation and a community foundation grant to the Arts Council. And these kind of cross-sector collaborations, which we've been aiming for a while, are really bearing fruit through this NASA project that we're working with. This is leveraging state investments in creative aging initiative, which is a mouthful, but it's an important mouthful. We are working with 19 different state arts agencies to build their capacity, and they're teaching artists and arts organizations to implement creative aging programs. But we're also working to encourage state agencies to develop cross-sector collaborations and partnerships that recognize older adults as a common constituency. Some of the current examples, which are very exciting, are, for instance, Idaho Commission on the Arts is building a partnership with the State Veterans Administration, a crucial statewide organization that exists in every state at the state level, at regional levels, local levels. VAs and all the people that participate in those organizations have a huge population of older adults who deserve to have access to this kind of programming. We're training senior, state librarians in Delaware are working in a collaborative initiative with the Division of the Arts there. We're training senior service organizations to host programs for the New Jersey State Arts Council on the Arts. And in Utah has the goal of training 25 to 50 arts and cultural organizations from across the state to be prepared to implement creative aging programs in their own sites and to be able to identify new local and community-based partnerships. This is only a snapshot of what's happening across the country. It's clear that state arts agencies are understanding that it is in partnership with a variety of sectors that creative aging programs will begin to flourish. And more importantly, the cross-sector collaboration is necessary to ensure that these programs will be sustainable beyond NASA's current grant. So cross-sector partnerships ensure that creative aging programs are inclusive, accessible, and equitable. Importantly, BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, and people of color, as well as lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender individuals constitute a significant and rapidly growing portion of the older adult population in the US. In 2010, people of color made up 20% of the nation's total 65+ demographic, a figure that will more than double by 2050. Advocates and aging services providers say that LGBTQIA and older adults of color face significant disparities in health and healthcare access, economic security, housing, employment, and community support, and more. Creative aging work addresses these inequalities, ensuring that arts programming is accessible for the full spectrum span of diverse older adults and is responsive to their needs. So we get down to the basics right now, and that is what is exactly creative aging. In the early days of our work, when we said arts and older adults, people immediately said, oh, you mean arts and crafts. And so we have come a very long way, thank goodness, from that. But in the early days, we actually had to provide sort of a glossary of terms for non-arts programmers to explain that besides painting or watercolor, there were the performing arts, the literary arts, the media arts, and within the visual arts, there were thousands of different opportunities. And we actually produced sort of directories and dictionaries for the non-arts people. The people are learning, and great programs have been done. So we at Lifetime Arts, we define creative aging as professionally led instructional arts programs that build skills over time across all arts disciplines. In short, it's arts education for older adults. So we need to clarify the difference between arts education programs, which are the main focus of the work that we're doing with the state arts agencies, and other creative aging models. And there is extraordinary work, and was mentioned in earlier conversations, happening in the creative aging area of art therapies. Much of this work happens in clinical or skilled nursing settings. Although both kinds of programs benefit participants, the goals of creative aging arts education programs are different from therapeutic programs. Therapeutic programs use arts modalities and creative processes to promote wellness, recovery, and rehabilitation through unique, usually one-on-one interactions. And the creative aging arts programs are delivered generally in community settings, either in person or virtually. They are instructional and focus on the older adults as art makers and co-learners. The difference is learning a new skill, learning a new art skill versus improving physical or mental health. For example, learning how to write a poem versus improving cognitive function, or learning how to mix paint versus improving motor skills. There's been a lot of talk today already about Gene Cohen's work, and Ashton referred to it also yesterday. And this is really important work, as Heather talked about. It underpins our work. And just a quick review for those who may not be familiar with it. The creative aging arts education model is inspired by this creativity and aging study. And the study proves that arts engagement is especially good for older adults. It's something that as arts practitioners, we all have always known that the arts are good for you. So here is some science finally to back it up. The program was done, this research was done over 3 years in 3 cities. In each site, there was a control group of older adults, ages 65 to 103, who did their usual activities, and an intervention group who participated in professionally conducted arts and cultural programs. There were 50 participants in both the control and intervention groups in all 3 sites. And both groups were well matched in terms of functioning at the start of the study. And with this age group, there was an expected decline over the 3 years, but instead, these were the results. Those in the intervention group used less medication, had fewer doctor visits, had less depression, and overall became much more engaged and active in their lives. Cohen and others have discovered that the aging brain is far more plastic or pliable than previously believed, and that structured learning, especially through the arts, can improve cognitive functioning, enhance the quality of life. One of the big issues here today is a powerful support for creative aging is its incredible efficacy in combating social isolation. And that has become really kind of a main message to get to funders and potential supporters for this work. In his work, Cohen identified really 2 critical ingredients to creative aging: mastery and social engagement. So no matter how it's delivered, these are the 2 things that are really critical to include. The developing mastery of an art form and forming community through the art making experience. To define this further, we see that mastery of skills is learning an art form in depth and having the opportunity to practice the art and become better at it over time. And the social engagement component builds community between participants and should be connected directly to the art making and to the learning. Simply put, creative aging is successful when the older adult learns something new and makes a friend in the process. We have some amazing stories around this, for instance, a choral program in Staten Island in a public library. Started out with librarians thinking that nobody was going to show up. They thought maybe 15 or 20 people would show up. 60 applied and showed up, and they had to move it to a larger library in the next neighborhood. And at the culminating event, 2 of the participants announced their wedding engagement. They were both in their late 80s. This was excellent social engagement that happened through learning. So the creative aging model that we promote is influenced by Cohen's research, and it's based on best practices in arts education and the K-12 arts residency model that many of you are familiar with. The work is student-centered, skills-based, sequential, and participatory. Whether doing an in-person or a virtual program, these components are standard across disciplines and host organizations. They are sequential classes. These are not drop-in programs, which are the usual traditional older adult kinds of services. They are taught by professional teaching artists. They are registration-based, meaning that people commit to the full number of workshop sessions, usually between 6 and 8 sessions. And they are either free or fee-based, but they are registration-based. And they all celebrate the work through a culminating event. And now back to Annie.
Great, thank you, Maura. And just to know, we are going to have time at the end for some Q&A around all of this stuff. But first, because we are in a virtual space, let's take a break from the screen. We're not going to go anywhere, but what I'd love for you to do is, I always take off my readers because that helps my eyes. And we're just going to breathe for a second and just take a break to let ourselves process a little bit of this information. So if you could take a deep breath in through your nose and out through your mouth. In through your nose and out through your mouth. And now I want you to lift your eyes away from the screen. Don't look at me. You can just listen to my voice. Look at something about 20 feet away from you. Fix your gaze lightly on that thing. It's something that you can really just enjoy looking at. Breathing normally now. I'm just going to count us back from 20, and we're going to breathe in and out normally and just rest our eyes and process our thoughts. 20, 19, 18, 17, breathing, 16, 15, 14, inhale, exhale, 13, 12, 11, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and give your eyes a blink. Take a deep breath in through your nose, out through your mouth, and you can, if you're like me, put your glasses back on if you'd like, and we're gonna return to the presentation. But just a note, I'm actually just demonstrating a technique that we use on our remote classes, and that we've learned from a teaching artist. This is something that they do every 20 minutes, actually. They do that, and that's where the 20-20-20 comes from. They take a break every 20 minutes. They look away from the screen about 20 feet away in distance, and they breathe for 20 seconds. And this has become an online learning techniques that we're seeing some teaching artists implement with all learners, but it works with creative aging learners as well. So back to it. So NASA's leveraging state investments in creative aging supports the creative aging arts education model that Maura was just sort of talking about and leading us through the basic components of. And many of the states that are participating in the initiative are developing creative aging programs utilizing the model to inform their own program designs and concepts. And I want to mention that this is the model that informs that. But what Heather sort of mentioned earlier too, we also love to see people kind of jump away from that and create their own models. So it's a place to begin, and then seeing what comes next is really exciting for Lifetime Arts to see. But what's interesting is both of these or any of the design concepts work both in an in-person setting and in remote programs. And as you know, over the last year, arts organizations across the country pivoted to remote learning. And in the way Elizabeth mentioned, sometimes they were really on the ground and in the fields and in the weeds with our communities, and really helping build back the communities there that when so much was lost when COVID began. And so amazingly, also many organizations that had creative aging programs also did this equally well. And then in this next section, we're going to really review the components of the creative aging arts education model, but share some of the ways organizations have adapted this model to remote learning formats. And to begin, just a couple of case studies here. You can go to the next slide, Carol, thank you. So an example of how one teaching artist and organization did this was Deborah Pasqueret. She was the manager, or is the manager, of community engagement for the Wallace Annenberg Center of Performing Arts in Beverly Hills, California. And she was also an original recipient of National Guild's Creative Aging Initiative. She continued the work, though, I should mention too. This this story came after her funding, but she had kept the programming in Beverly Hills, and the Annenberg Center for Performing Arts kept the program going. So that's really great news. But anyway, they were presenting and preparing for their culminating event when all of their in-person classes were canceled due to COVID-19. So Deborah really worked with her students and designed a new extended curriculum that continued the class meeting weekly, but it went well beyond the original 8 weeks that were scheduled. And this was really not the norm for what was happening during and what we heard from creative aging programs. But what Deborah really did was she went to her students and she talked to them about what they wanted and what they needed. And they expressly asked to continue meeting for longer, for at least as long as they were meeting in person. And then what was really great too is they really dove into the moment. You know, her curriculum shifted too, and their themes shifted around what they were exploring. And so they utilized writing prompts, and they really looked at the work and their feelings, the stories, what was coming up about living in this new world of social isolation and distancing. And another thing that she did too, just to really enhance building community, she always opened up her session early, and she invited folks to come in and to be able to have some unstructured time together. All of these things will start to inform some of the best practices that we are now disseminating. You can go to the next slide, Carol. Additionally, circling back again to Heather and Elizabeth, I'd love to share a story about how these two folks really created a really human-centered approach to their design. So over the years, teaching artist Linda Monick Eisenberg worked with older residents at the Common Bond community. This was originally through our Seeding Vitality Arts initiative. And Common Bond is an affordable housing not-for-profit based in Minnesota. And she had developed a very close organic working relationship with the Arts and Aging Program Manager, Kate Houston. But when COVID hit, clearly Kate and Linda shared a lot of concerns about how the residents were going to be able to meet up and continuing their programming, which had become so vitally important to them. So they got together and they decided, because Linda had a ton of experience working online already through her work at Minneapolis College of Art and Design, that they're going to pilot a program and use that pilot as sort of their testing ground for what would it mean to have a visual arts program online in the Common Bond community. And they decided to use this trial program to really evaluate their students' interests, their tech needs, their abilities, and test their own ability to teach remotely to an older adult community, and what would that mean and what would that look like. So participants in the initial workshop used a wide variety of tech: cell phones, tablets, laptops, desktop computers, you name it, whatever they had, they got them online. And even though access was clearly very difficult at times, students said that they valued their time that they shared together and felt that they had learned more in this new format than they had in person. Exactly what Heather said. Sometimes it's most important to put community first and skills secondarily. So really looking at the marriage between those two things in the effort of creative aging is really the glue that holds it together, in my opinion. So then, just to follow up on that, during the summer and fall of 2020, because they had learned so much, they were able to ratchet up the remote course options and to the larger Common Bond community, and they brought in other teaching artists. And so then Kate and Linda also initiated a teaching artist learning circle to help problem solve, peer teach, and learn together about teaching in this new format, which is so important. And again, bringing the teaching artists together in a supportive environment. So we're going to look at some of how this ties into some of the suggestions in just a bit to our remote learning platforms and formats, and what we've culled together really based on the experience of people in the field doing this work. You can go to the next slide, Carol. So let's look at the model for a second, the in-person model, and then versus the adaptations that might need to be made in an online learning environment. So Lifetime Arts, we still recommend a sequential model for arts learning when online, where skills build over time, but we completely understand and are learning from the people out there doing it, how this might need to be adapted. And so I'm actually going to put in a resource into the chat. This is going to really give you a kind of a quick breakdown of all the things that I'm going to be talking about, but please share this. It also can be found on our creative aging resource. But this is a quick breakdown of that. So in-person classes, we recommend a minimum of 8 sequential class sessions. But we have found that a lot of folks, not Deborah Pasqueret, who I mentioned in the beginning, but a lot of folks have shortened their synchronous sessions to maybe 4 or 6 sessions when folks move to online programming. And often when we do in-person classes, we start at a minimum of 90 minutes. Visual arts sometimes does 3 hours, depending if they have some studio time attached to their program. However, online, we are seeing classes being shortened to somewhere between 45 to 65 minutes. Manageable teacher to student ratios still are really, really important. So just because an online platform can accommodate 100 people, and like we are today, that doesn't mean, though, in a creative aging arts education class, that we would maintain the goals at that size. So it should be appropriate to the art form and probably pretty closely aligned with what you would do in an in-person setting. So you may have to limit your enrollment. You could go to the next slide. So if you're looking and thinking about teaching older adults online, and if you're thinking about how your state can support this, you need to seriously think about some of the art form choices in terms of what will be the most successful in these formats. So teaching artists often are skilled in several aspects of a single art form, and that is such a bonus. So for example, a challenge might be that the teaching artist has always taught painting in a studio and had tons of supplies at hand, but they can't do that online, or they may not be able to get their supplies to their students. So the adaptation could be, it becomes a drawing program where students use pen and paper, or maybe an art form that is sort of a growth that comes out of drawing, which might be collage, for example, where participants utilize their own materials. Group classes have become more individually focused. Choirs are a great example of this, where the focus becomes vocal technique for the individual singer versus blending as a choir, which we now know you can't do on Zoom. And so it's very, very good adjustment. Multidisciplinary forms are really becoming very popular because perhaps, for example, you might be teaching a creative aging movement or a creative movement class, but maybe you introduce poetry also into the workshop model that is related to the movement, because sometimes having an affiliated art form might be easier and more accessible in certain remote platforms. Focusing on 1 or 2 skills or main learning concepts becomes really key. For example, the focus can become more about music theory rather than playing instruments together as a big group. I'll go very quickly through this slide because the main point of this, and all of you I'm sure are pretty familiar with this terminology, synchronous learning, meeting like like you would in a class setting, meeting week to week to week on a Zoom platform. All of our students across the country have been meeting synchronously, but they've also been having asynchronous assignments, which might be, a resource that they have to review, or a video they have to watch in between classes. So what's interesting and amazing, though, is both of these concepts still absolutely apply in the creative aging model. And it's been really fascinating and inspiring to see how teaching artists are utilizing asynchronous learning specifically as a supplement to the learning that they're doing with their students in an in-class model in the synchronous meetings. However, a different kind of tact on this, you can go to the next slide. These asynchronous examples and suggestions that we have mentioned definitively extend learning, but they don't always promote social engagement. So one of the things that we are encouraging teaching artists and the arts organizations that we're training and working with is to think about asynchronous options in creative aging specifically, as also time outside of the full group meetings where you can plan opportunities for your students to connect with one another around an art form. So a big important part of this, and this again, all of these connecting themes today, is the responsiveness around that design needs to really be done in collaboration with your students. Ask them for their input on how they might want to connect with their fellow students outside of class, outside of synchronous classes. But some examples that teaching artists are trying with their students are sometimes students meet up on the phone in pairs to talk about a resource, or they might share their work. If it's written like poetry, they might give each other feedback or support. And it can just be a telephone call if they're willing to share their contact information. Teaching artists are starting discussion groups or chat boards, maybe utilizing platforms like Facebook, again, in consideration with what their students want. And finally, a really popular part of this asynchronous learning is office hours. Teaching artists are meeting one-on-one with their students in between the synchronous sessions to support their work and process. And this really helps to grow the students' confidence and embed some of the learning that they're doing in the synchronous sessions. And finally, culminating events are still a really big part of the remote formats. And so one thing that to think about is that sometimes in the remote formats and in the remote design is that the culminating event can take place either synchronously, like in a Zoom call where you invite guests to attend and you share, a reading or poetry or written work or music that they're learning. You can absolutely keep the culminating event to a synchronous session. But interestingly, too, there's also been a really big boom of asynchronous culminating events. And that might look like a virtual gallery, for example, or creating videos and sharing links and finding platforms that can support the sharing of those links. So both options we're seeing in remote formats work. And in some ways, the asynchronous option sometimes helps older adults kind of be more at ease because they don't have that, oh, I'm in person and I'm on and I'm performing. It sometimes can be an easier step in. An example, you can go to the next slide. I know I'm off script. I do this, Carol, I apologize. I just talk. So an example though of a great culminating event that the Museum of History, Anthropology and Art of the University of Puerto Rico, who was also a recipient of the Succeeding Vitality Arts Museum initiative, they pivoted their creative aging online programs right when COVID hit, but they still really wanted to do a culminating event. And I think in my knowledge, they were really one of the first organizations. I saw them do this before I saw any youth organizations or arts and education organizations for the P through 12 group do this. So I thought this was just amazing and so quick in their event, but they created a virtual gallery. And so I'm going to put into the chat a link really quickly to a virtual gallery tool that you can check out in your own time that they utilize. This tool is free to view, not free to utilize. There is a little bit of a fee associated with it, but it's very reasonable in most cases. And they have all sorts of levels, so you can look at all of this. But what's even better about the Museum of Anthropology and Art is they've continued their programming. They're continuing their program remotely. It has not stopped. And so I'm also now putting into the chat their most recent exhibit. It's phenomenal. We don't have time to go on to it now, but please check it out. Check out this resource. It's like you're in a virtual space, and I cannot describe enough how exciting that is for any student, but older adults to have that visibility in their communities is huge. And then another person, you can go to the next slide, who did an asynchronous pivot, which was phenomenal, was a gentleman named Dane Stauffer. And he pivoted and I'm going to do this story quick, but he did a storytelling class, and he had all of his students do podcasts in his storytelling class, and they published those links rather than doing a synchronous celebration of their work, which really worked out well. So just a little bit, next slide, please, of understanding around this digital divide. The Pew Research Center says that only 73% of older adults 65 and up use the internet. That's a huge improvement on the past. Now that demographic skews to the younger, more affluent end of the spectrum. But that study also, which is not good, we want it to include everybody. So we have a lot of work to do there. But that study also revealed that older adults often feel intimidated by technology and benefit from help from others to get online. You can go to the next slide, please. So with that, and I'm going to just have you take a look at some of these tips here. I'm not going to go into all of them, but what we have really seen is the pre-program setup for older adults is key, absolutely key to getting them online. And that time and that intentionality that needs to be built in before program launches cannot be underscored enough. So all of those suggestions that you see on the slide are things that we've seen people do across the country. And I particularly want to call out the Senior Planet Tech Hotline and Aging Connected, which I will put into the chat. These are two invaluable resources that can help you get your older adults online. And then finally, just the last two things I want to cover, and we go into more detail. I should say too, in our teaching artist training, we go very in depth. So we're just skimming the surface of some of these recommendations, but I do think it's important to point out a couple of key points today. The ability, and this goes back to what Heather and Elizabeth were talking about, is that these programs need to be supportive, not just from a teaching artist. They are the underbelly and they are the total heart of the programming in terms of design of the programming, but the tech support needs to come from the organization. A teaching artist needs to have the ability, if at all possible, I know it's not always possible, but thinking about this as you're planning your programs and encouraging your programs in terms it affects the funding for the programs, the budgets of the programs, to have a tech support person in every single class to help ensure that the older adults will have a successful experience and that the teaching artist can teach the class in the way that that is meaningful for all the students, and that they don't get derailed into tech issues, which we know we've all been there. We know how that can happen. But finally, you can go to the next slide. The one thing I do want to mention though is that we're really finding that teaching artists can, though, help curricularly support the students. So often we're seeing a real conversation between host organizations and teaching artists about how they divide up roles and responsibilities between how the organization is supporting the students and how the teaching artist is supporting the students in between classes. These are just some recommendations that are on the slide. Ultimately, what it really comes down to, again, is that pre-program planning and really identifying roles and responsibilities, because online programming, in so many ways, we have heard such beautiful stories about how it has actually invited more students to the table than were there in in-person programming, because we finally crossed the at-home divide for those older adults who can't get out for whatever reasons. We're starting to kind of crack that nut, which is amazing, but it takes a team effort on everyone's part. So Teaching Artist is never alone in this work. It is really in partnership with the host organization to ensure that the older adults are successful and have a really enriching, transformative experience. And that's it for me for now. And I'll pass it back to Susan.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Annie and Maura. That was super, super informative. I have to tell you, it's like really resonating for me, that last bit that you shared about intentionally supporting a teaching artist to be able to do the art and have another pair of hands that can really help with the tech support. That is really meaningful. Well, we do have a couple of questions that came up during your presentation. So let me start with the first one that we saw from Linda in Nebraska. This is sort of towards the beginning of your presentation about partnerships and how, I think, Maura, it was when you were describing sort of these cross-sector partnerships and sharing some examples of state arts agencies and other state organizations or agencies. How are you defining partnerships? Must there be funding contributed from each partner to be defined as a cross-sector partner?
Now, I would say that there aren't any two partnerships that are the same, and some are connected just by mission, by geographic proximity, by population served, and in terms of funding, we seek out partnerships that advance the work. Sometimes a partner has funding, maybe cash on hand, and it may be in-kind contributions that make the work happen. So the variety of partnerships at every level, whether it's federal government agency to federal government agency, or in a local community, the local library with the local senior center, generally all have things to offer. And the idea is to find the commonalities and what the common goals are. And it's often around serving older adults. So for instance, the senior center may have the space, but the local arts center has a teaching artist do the work. So the variety and depth of partnerships varies all the time. And I think that, in a win-win situation, funding, collaboration, partnered coordination, administration, all those things come together. But it does vary, and it doesn't necessarily, you can name your own partnerships. There's not a formula in place. And we've experienced and continue to experience all different kinds.
It's a great reminder. I know we've had conversations along the way about also just how in your work with state arts agencies and the Leveraging State Investments project, every state has a very different approach to this, and honoring that makes all the sense in the world.
And that's why we talked earlier about the fact that we work with a model, but it's an adaptable model, and it's based on real life work in the field. And it's the same, when we first started, our first partners were with public library systems. And we always thought that, well, public education systems are the most complex, most bureaucratic, most, out of scale kinds of organizations. Not true. Public libraries and state arts agencies may be right up there with complexity and differences all across the board. There aren't any two that are the same. And that's really important to realize, because it's the same with older adults. There aren't any two that are the same. And so it just goes right from the very core of the work straight up and, in all directions.
Well, it's a great segue actually to the next question that came in from our colleagues at the Oklahoma Arts Council, who are wondering, although the benefits of ongoing sequential skill building are well documented, are there also barriers that come up with ongoing programs, things like transportation, tuition costs, and et cetera?
Yes.
How do you help lower those barriers for participants? So how do you adapt?
Well, part of it is actually partnerships and the development of community-based partnerships, because there are some great examples actually recently, for instance, of the Meals on Wheels organization in a local community delivering art supplies to homebound people during COVID. So these are transportation for older adults, weather, weather issues, geography, and people who are at a distance from cultural organizations, especially in rural states. These are problems that always exist to varying degrees in every single program. Whether you have the space for, you may not have a space to store artwork. You may not have you may not have parking available for people or public transportation, but there are entities that do, especially when you partner with senior service organizations that are used to dealing with issues of access and transportation in particular. So again, it's about developing partnerships that can support the work. And it means sharing your Legos, giving your stuff out, sharing the information you have, and helping other people to succeed in the work. And, it may be that the senior center wants a program, but they only have the time to do it at lunchtime. Don't ever go into a senior center at lunchtime. Number one rule in this work. You want to avoid that at all costs. So you've got to find alternative times, alternative spaces, and it's through conversations and asking questions, and also building teams within the community that you're working with. When it is just a teaching artist and one programmer who may have the passion around this work, it will go to a certain point. But developing partnerships that are broader, that include boards of directors and administrators and other people who may not be any way related to arts and aging, but who may have an interest, is to build partnerships and ask questions and tell people what you need. And so it's work, but I think any good programming is developed through collaboration.
I have to say, Maura, I hear in your voice really the sound of experience, the voice of experience, and really
I'm very old. Yes,
that's not what I mean. I mean, literally, you are very experienced, and and it really builds confidence. I think hearing you speak from a place of deep experience.
Well, I have to say, Susan, that participating in this initiative and in the others that we're working with in here, for instance, Elizabeth and Laura and Heather talk with such passion and confidence about this work that I have been doing for a long time is really gratifying and very exciting. That's why we're still doing it. That's why, and it's growing continuously. It's kind of amazing, actually, how much it is growing and how valuable it is, and how many more people and institutions and organizations are really beginning to see the value of this work. So it's exciting.
That's awesome. But we have one more question coming in from Kim at the Tennessee Arts Commission. Different direction. So it's a great one to bring us to a close. Kim is wondering, is there any research that supports how different cultures view ageism? For example, in Africa and in some cultures in the US, people over 40 years old are highly valued and respected due to a perceived increase in wisdom and experience.
Sure. I don't know specific, but I'm sure actually part of our Creative Aging resource probably identifies some of that, but we can certainly look that up. But it is true that in the United States, the cultural differences around older adults is evident to all of us who work in this field. And I think personally that it is changing because of this work, that especially for young teaching artists who get into this work, it changes the way they think about growing older. And it changes for older adults getting involved in this work. It changes the way they feel about growing older. We had a woman who was going through, it was part of a memoir writing program. It was actually right here in my local town. And at some point, her husband, she was in her 80s, her husband died. And at the culminating event, she came to read her poem. Her husband had died 3 weeks before. And she wasn't able to read the poem that she wrote, but the teaching artist stood next to her, embraced her, and he read the poem for her. And afterwards, when we spoke to her, she said, and I wish, there's been so many things like this. She said, I've always been afraid of dying and growing older. She said, but since I've been involved with this group, she said, I'm not afraid anymore. She said, I have a new family. I have new connections. I have a reason to keep on going. It's like, pretty magical, pretty positive. No reason to stop this work,
Yeah.
So, and these were people in a public library who had never met before, who never in a million years would have met, except they came together around the learning. They came because they wanted to write their memoirs. They were very directed. So
makes me feel a bit emotional to hear that. And I think that's
I see Ed's on the line right now. Ed and I used to go to in the early days, used to go to all of the culminating events because we worked very locally. But I used to cry so much that I could never, people say, oh, why didn't you say a few words? Well, I was, gagging in the background. So we've gotten better. We've gotten better at it. But it's important work. It's important work.
Well, speaking of Ed, I think maybe it was Ed who just popped in the chat also.
There he is.
Great, called Age Through Ethnic Lenses by Laura Katz-Olson. So Kim, I hope that's helpful for you and everyone else. We're right at time. So I think we should close our session today. And I just want to thank you both, Annie and Maura, for sharing your inimitable expertise. Truly, truly amazing. And your passion, as Maura said, it's also infectious and such an important part of how we sustain this work as well. I mentioned it, but Lifetime Arts is an honored partner of ours, of NASA's, and we truly feel so fortunate to have your guidance and wisdom in this new area of work in how we're supporting our members of the state arts agencies. I thank you also to our audience members for asking excellent questions that really help us see what is relevant to the field, to understand what's alive for you and meaningful. So thanks for sharing your questions and moving the dialogue forward. I wish you all a good night, a good weekend. Thank you for being here, and we will see you next week. Thanks again.